This is Dan Valentine, and the following is a essay that I wrote when I was 16 in 2015, questioning the relationship between Christianity and war. My name is Dan Valentine. I'm a born again Christian, libertarian, and a learner. The idea I want to share with you today is one that you've likely never heard and may not understand. It's likely that it will offend, and I apologize if it does so. I'm going off the index card of allowable opinion here. Nonetheless, I find it extremely important for the church in America to hear. The question is, who would Jesus bomb? In modern America, there exists a sort of deep reverence and respect for the US military, especially in the church and among the Christian right. In the US, war is glorified not only in movies and on television, but by most people. People who fight are seen as heroes, defending the freedoms of the nation. They are honored and loved by patriotic citizens. US wars are considered just and necessary. Any other view is basically unheard of or completely ostracized. What is war? Well, it's an armed conflict between groups or nations. It is full of death, destruction, and despair. You would think the church would oppose this at all costs, or at least denounce it. The fact is that, as far as I can see, they do not. The church and most of its leaders glorify war and praise those who fight it. When you think there would be a condemnation of war, the church either supports it or is silent on the matter. Of all things followers of Christ should act on, this is near the top of the list. War is murder on a large scale, defining murder as the premeditated killing of one human being by another. Thou shalt not murder. Exodus 20:13. One of the 10 commandments we all know. War is just murder on a wide scale. There is no moral free zone in war. It is wrong to go and kill people in your neighborhood, and it's also wrong to go and kill people in another neighborhood, even if it's in Afghanistan. The fact that a politician ordered a soldier to do it doesn't change the fact that it's wrong. There's a faulty idea that murder ceases to be murder simply because a politician ordered it. If it is wrong to murder one person, then it is wrong to murder more people as part of a group, even if you're in a government military. Romans 2:11 says, God shows no partiality. Murder is always wrong, and we will be judged accordingly. It's also interesting when pro-military and pro-war Christians claim to be pro-life while supporting the deaths of thousands or millions of individuals. War is terrorism. Terrorism being defined as the use of violence and intimidation in pursuit of political aims. The word terrorism is one used by governments and the media to describe non-government acts of war. It is used to make people dislike aggression by unfavorable groups while ignoring the aggression of the US government and its allies. Today's freedom fighters are tomorrow's terrorists. It's just a word. War in itself is terrorism. Violence and intimidation in the pursuit of political aims. If this is what terrorism is, then what is the US military and other government militaries? Well, maybe they are organizations of terror themselves. And unfortunately, the examples are endless. Around 400 million people have been killed by terrorism since 1900. 250 million of these were killed by their own government. The US military. Live peaceably with all men. Romans 12:18. Members of the US military are simply armed government mercenaries fighting for the government. The US military is not fighting for us. They are fighting for the will of politicians and to the benefit of corporations and banks. They do not fight for our freedom, and they never have. This is blasphemy to the ears of modern Americans. The US military regularly invades and occupies foreign nations and ends up killing thousands or millions of people. Since World War II, the US military has invaded Afghanistan, Vietnam, the Dominican Republic, Grenada, Panama, Korea, Cuba, Somalia, Haiti, and Iraq multiple times. The US military has taken the lives of over 30 million individuals in these wars since 1946. The US federal government has been at war for more than 217 years out of the 239 years it has existed. What about terrorism? Well, the US military itself is a terrorist organization, much worse than Al Qaeda or ISIS, which the US helped to create. Terrorism is defined as the use of violence and intimidation in the pursuit of political aims. This is exactly what they do. Take, for example, the thousands of individuals killed in the Middle East by unmanned drones. More people killed than in 9/11. Who are these groups we generally call terrorists anyway? Well, although many of them do some evil things, we must look for their incentive. It's simple economics that when people do things, they do it based on incentives. The incentive, most of the time, is that a government thousands of miles away has invaded their homeland and is bombing their neighborhoods. These terrorists don't hate the US for its freedom. They hate it because it has slaughtered their family members, installed puppet dictators, and continues to violently involve itself in their national affairs. The US military creates more terrorists than it has killed, especially in the war on terror. Imagine if China invaded the US due to its oppression of its citizens. Imagine it began bombing its military bases and firing missiles into your neighborhood. Imagine they were patrolling the streets and kicking down doors and shooting people. Imagine if you were shot simply because you were defending your family. It's obvious that millions of people would form militias and fight back. We would use whatever means necessary, even if it came to car bombs and other improvised explosives, to defend our country, our neighborhood, our families. This would likely be the same with invasions from Nazis, Soviets, or Japanese. This is nearly an identical situation in the countries in which anti American terrorism is prevalent. Unfortunately, the media portrays them as dumb Islamic extremists who have nothing better to do than go bomb people for their freedom. It's not the case. Obviously, there's a lot more to the US military than these wars, which is mostly operating as a threat to any group in the world or in America, that dares stand up to the US government. The military acts as the fist of the bully that is the US government. It should not be ignored that the US armed forces have done some good things, but this is far overshadowed by the evil. Note that when I say US government, I'm referring to the feds, not the hundreds of millions of people in the United States. What about joining the military? Take no part in the worthless deeds of evil and darkness. Instead, expose them. Ephesians 5:11. As put by Adam Kokesh, an Iraq veteran, joining the military is either an act of cowardice, ignorance, or greed. Cowardice because they are going to fight a little threat instead of fighting the despotic US government, which is the real threat to our freedom. Who is doing the most harm to our freedom? It's the US government who steals from us, hurts us, kills us, and aggresses against liberty more than any other entity in the world. Americans are 58 times more likely to be killed by a cop than a terrorist now. It is cowardly to not only not fight the big threat, but also to do whatever that big threat to freedom tells you to do. Ignorance, because they think they are fighting for freedom or for the American people, which is obviously not the case. If they weren't so ignorant, they would go peacefully do something productive for America instead of chasing around imaginary enemies, doing the bidding of politicians, and protecting the US government. Greed, because many people join the US military for selfish purposes or for money, benefits, college. They live off money extorted from the American people for their paycheck and whatever they receive. The military is itself a socialist institution and a welfare organization where the members are owned by the state, serve the state, and are provided for by what the state steals from hardworking Americans. Certainly, there are Christians who may join the military, reserves, or such with only good in mind, and they may never hurt somebody personally. They are still aiding and abetting the enemy, and that they are supporting an organization of terror and evil. We should rather be dumpster diving than receiving our paychecks by serving an organization whose sole purpose is to hurt innocent people and defend a despotic and tyrannical regime. Once again, the idea that military members are serving the American people or defending their freedoms is complete nonsense. Freedom has decreased as war occurs. And if they were serving me, they'd stop killing innocent people. Support the troops is nonsense. It's a useless propaganda tool to trick us into not thinking. Patriotism is nonsense as well. It's quite obviously idolatry, idiocy. Christians, even more than normal folks, should vacate and stay out of the military. It is no place for a follower of Christ to be. Christians ought not to be terrorists. What about Christians? Blessed are the peacemakers. Matthew 5:9. The American Christian's attitude toward the military is generally one of admiration and honor. This should not be. Being a member of the US military, or most state militaries or gangs of evildoers, is not an honorable thing. Being a member of Al Qaeda or ISIS is just as evil. Jesus praises peace and condemns aggression and the violence of man. He doesn't take the side of one terrorist organization over another. Jesus commanded us to love your neighbor as yourself in Matthew 22:39. And he goes on to tell the story of the Good Samaritan, in which the Samaritan shows love and kindness to a Jewish man, ignoring whatever anger their nations had against each other. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. Matthew 5:39. This argument is against aggression and those who use it. My purpose here is not to address self defense on the small scale. And when we say aggression, we're saying forceful action or procedure, especially when intended to dominate or master. State militaries, like other terrorist organizations, are evil, worldly institutions that kill millions and are paid for through thievery. To be a part of these organizations is to aid in their crimes. To kill for these organizations is to be a murderer. And no murderer has eternal life residing in him. 1 John 3:5. Let's condemn the evil of war and militaries, not praise them. Thou shalt not murder. Exodus 20:13. Live peaceably with all men. Romans 12:18. Follow peace with all men. Hebrews 12:14. Blessed are the peacemakers. Matthew 5:9. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Matthew 5:44. Take no part in the worthless deeds of evil and darkness. Instead, expose them. Ephesians 5:11. Whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. James 4:17. That's the conclusion of the essay. Although my perspective has changed somewhat, I'm still on the same page as where I was when I was 16. That as Jesus followers, we are called to love people, to serve people, to care for people, and to never turn to violence and aggression and anger toward our neighbors, but rather mercy and compassion, even toward our enemies and even people that do awful things. I encourage you to seriously pray, reflect, consider what I wrote here when I was 16 and not just dismiss this 16-year-old kid as not having a clue. As Jesus followers, our job is not to harm our neighbors, but to care for our neighbors, to share the gospel with them. And there should not be any more of this supporting wars and the people that fight them, but rather we ought to love our neighbors as ourselves. Thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful day.